this is a themed discussion. So these are a little bit different than our community discussions where we talk about all the sort of logistics and other things involved with running a workshop, being an instructor. This one is about library carpentry, what's new with library carpentry. And so one of the things that I wanted to start with is some helpful links. So I actually copied and pasted the slides in the Etherpad if you wanted to look there and follow along, because I know you can't see the links here. But I'll describe these links. So we are now an official lesson program. So one of the things that I did want to note is that when you are certified, you can actually teach library carpentry, you can teach data carpentry, you can teach software carpentry. So you are certified to teach the lesson programs. So that is something that I've gotten questions about. So just to let you know. And then also our website is a really great resource for understanding library carpentry if you want to teach it. And then one of the other things we have for instructors really is an onboarding presentation that's really sort of helpful. It walks through all the different things to note about the community before you teach. So I would recommend looking at those and just walking through them, reading them, just to get an understanding of the community and get an understanding of library carpentry. But I'm also a resource, and other people in the library community, library carpentry community, are resources, and the Carpentries as well. So you know, that's you can always turn to one of us too. So the agenda for this is really about new things that have happened in library carpentry since we've come on board, and there's been already a lot actually. So we became official at the end of last year, and we already have like some news to report on. So just to go down the list, we ran a sprint in November called the Top 10 Fair Data and Software Things. And that created some new material for us to think about in the carpentry. So I'll walk through that and talk about it a little bit more. Library carpentry maintainers. So that we'll talk about this a little bit as well, but maintainers are working on the lessons at the moment. So there's a lot going on to update them, sometimes move them from beta to stable, sometimes developing new lessons, or sometimes we have some opportunities to move a lesson from alpha to even stable. So there's a lot of work going on that. And so I'll talk a little bit about that. And then upcoming events, some events for you to keep on your calendar, on the horizon, just to note and maybe get involved with. So I'll start with this sprint. So we ran it from the 29th to the 30th of November 2008, and it was very much modeled on a sprint that we've done before with Mozilla. And the sprint we've done with Mozilla has focused primarily on lessons, on updating the lessons or developing new lessons. This one was a little bit different. It had its inspiration from something else called the 23 research data things. And that was started out of ANS, which is now called the Australian Research Data Commons. And what they did was actually take that down a little bit and refine it into even like 10 things. And what these 10 things are brief guides that have exercises. So they introduce you to a topic, and then you have exercises to sort of get that hands-on experience, get that exposure, that further exposure. So it's really lightweight material that they developed. And so one of the things that actually came up at CarpentryCon was at our recent CarpentryCon in Dublin last year, there was a session on having discipline-specific material on FAIR. And so I should actually explain what FAIR is. So what it stands for is findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And I guess the best way to describe this is how, if I'm a researcher or if I'm a librarian, or, you know, in general, someone who wants to make their material more discoverable, you know, you can do various things to help, you know, databases, other platforms find your material. So, you know, do some things, underlying things to help link that up and do, you know, improve your metadata. And so it's a lot more than that. This is a simplistic view of it. You know, but I think as you look through the guides, you'll understand it a little bit more. And that was the whole purpose, right? Is to help people understand what FAIR was at maybe the discipline level. So this is a list of them. So you can see from oceanography to archaeology, the sprinters, what we did was and when I say we, it was a partnership between many other organizations. So it involved Foster Open Science, Research Data Alliance, and some other institutions that I can't remember right now, but are in the blog post. But we had groups, I think, roughly between 15 to 20 groups, maybe closer to 20, that participated in the sprint. And we did this over 2 days. And with this sort of instructional material of how to create a thing, how to create one of these guides, groups started working on them and developing sort of these brief guides with exercises in them, with 10 things in them to understand the, you know, FAIR at those particular disciplines. So I think I skipped forward a little bit quickly. Okay, so this is an example. So I'm talking a lot about these things. It's good to see what one of them looks like. And here's one thing in the 10 things. So thing 9 is state how to cite your software, right? So this gives you guidance on how you cite your software, you know, in various places, and what you can do to sort of improve, you know, getting the word out about your software, or, you know, getting credit for it, and you know, various things. So this is just an example of what one of the things looks like in one of these guides, and they're brief, and they have exercises like read the software citation principles and create CFF files, and so that's so I encourage you to look at some of them just to get a better idea. I'm skipping forward pretty quick. Another thing that we did was actually publish these through a process we do with other lessons. So we release lessons through Zenodo. And in this case, we did the same. We released it through, you know, through Zenodo, and gave credit to the people who worked on them. And I think there was a funny tweet thread about, what do you call this many orchids, which are author identifiers? You know, gaggle. So it was pretty funny, because I don't think I've ever seen this many orchids in my life. So maybe I have, but this is a lot. And so that was a way to cite the work and get credit. You know, get a digital object identifier, and for people who worked on it to basically send it around and use it in their CVs and use it on their in their profiles and bibliography. So I mentioned that we had some partners, and there's actually a new organization that entered the picture, so called Open Air, and this is a European organization. Foster Open Science is a European organization, and Australian Research Data Commons is Australian, of course. And I've heard from these organizations that they want to continue this and add to the repository of things. So that's great news. But all this raises questions because this is a new material for the Carpentries, or for Library Carpentry even. This is a new material. We have lessons. We, you know, we usually have that kind of material, and this is a new form of material that we have not, you know, haven't done before. And so that raises questions of, you know, that there's a question around that, of whether we, you know, keep doing this. And then there's been questions around developing possibly a new pedagogical approach around this. And that question came up in a UC librarians group. And so Scott, I think, was there. Yeah, that's another thing to think about as there are people interested in sort of taking these things and thinking about how they can be taught, in a half day, in a flexible way, because that's something that I think resonates in the library community sometimes. And then a template, there was no template. This is all new too. And so whether we need a template for these things is another question. I thought one thing that was interesting was that some of the people that contributed were new to the community. So they didn't know anything about Library Carpentry. They didn't know anything about the Carpentries. They were a little bit nervous about participating. And then when we walked them through everything, the sort of like lightweight instructions on how to do this and gave them an example, it felt a little bit more, I guess felt a little bit better about contributing and felt a little bit more at ease. So that's another thing that was interesting of like, is this a new entry point, a new way, to encourage members, to join the community, to participate. And then are there other things we can try? So I mentioned those organizations that were thinking about developing new things. And we do a lot of review and maintenance of lessons. How are we going to review and maintain these, this new form of material? That's another question. And anything else I missed is another question. So I wanted to sort of stop sharing my screen for the moment and actually return to our group and talk about this for about 10-15 minutes to see if anyone had any follow-up questions or comments about these things. And I realize I walked through that pretty quickly. So if you have any follow-up questions about FAIR or 10 things, then let me know. So we have a chat. We have a chat window over here in Zoom, and if you wanted to say anything, then please write hand in the chat, and then I can call on you. You can also write your question or comment in the chat as well, and feel free. We could also talk about other things too, about library carpentry if it's related to this as well. So yeah. So does anyone have a question? Okay, Cody, yeah.
Yeah, I was just curious. Like I was looking at the Fair Data and Software Things research libraries example, and it looks like Scott and Chris, you were both on that group, and maybe some others. But I'm sort of curious what the use case is of like how this would be shared with librarians, or which librarians, or if that's not quite there yet. It'd be great to hear like an example of how people would roll this out. Like I know at the University of Minnesota, there's interested in the Carpentries, and something like this seems like it, is another way to sort of introduce some of these practices and principles. So it'd be great to hear more.
Yeah. So this is all new, Cody. So I'm freestyling a little bit here, but sure. I do know that our upcoming Mozilla Sprint. So there is one on the horizon in May. And this could be very, very much could be a theme of testing these and speaking to what you actually are asking is like, how would we teach these? How do we handle these things? Because I think the brainstorming has happened, and now it's to see whether this is actually a useful tool as far as like teaching in some way in libraries, we actually do these half day sessions. We sometimes can't do a full 2-day workshop or a 1-day workshop even. And sometimes these, shorter, briefer things can be of value. So that's something I've heard other people say, is that this might be something I can use, in those kind of cases. I did on a previous call, someone said, I'm thinking about FAIR right now. and there is actually a FAIR, 10 FAIR things on the subject that I really want to, that I'm thinking about developing things around. So they were pretty happy about it. So that in itself as a resource could be helpful. But yeah, it's still, I think what's going to help is maybe testing this and understanding a little bit more in the next round of sprints and having discussions around it. So yeah, and Scott has a hand.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that, I was part of that research libraries, and we were just kind of going through and thinking like, what are these data principles and how could we like kind of take these certain principles of FAIR and put them into some framework that would make sense to librarians. I mean, the thing about FAIR, I think that is important to think about is it's kind of it's basically really focused on metadata. That's kind of the main focus of it. And it's also very vague in how it's applied. And it's like, with the big things about FAIR is that it's to look at your different disciplines. And so like when I've talked about FAIR with the computational text analysis group here last week, we talked a little bit about like, here are some of the better like repositories for people who are historians, because there's somebody who created a history one. So the FAIR data principles have a lot to do with like kind of making sure that your data is findable and reproducible through actually engaging with your discipline too. So they're not actually like kind of principles that like are kind of cross-discipline as much as they are principles that are cross disciplines but can be altered to those disciplines. And so I think like thinking about it in that way, I think might be help a little bit. But yeah, I mean, we put these together and we didn't have much time. It was, I think, Josh and Amy and some other people, a couple hours each day. And yeah, it was just kind of thinking of how to make this like, concrete examples and things that would relate to librarians.
Yeah, it was a helpful process to think about it. I found to step back and think about what FAIR means for these things. But Daria has a hand, so.
Sorry, yeah, I'm sort of trying to continue on this. And again, reminding that I'm not a librarian and I am coming from the Australian system, which I have a sense can be a little bit different to what's there in the US. So I know that at least in here, like Sydney, Queensland, I did my PhD, the library's responsibility is about, and especially the research librarian, is about archiving data and maintaining publication records, and not so much like as soon as we hit, for example, to like my area of research, which used to be bioinformatics, that was totally not like, that was completely out of purview of the library, because you have, again, dedicated repositories to this. And I know it's the same for astronomy. I know it's the same for physics. I know it's better and worse in some disciplines, but as soon as you're hitting any kind of like, real large scale data, you're going to dedicated repositories, and that's not the librarian helping you get there. So my question, and a lot of what I see in FAIR is about this, access to data, access to software. I can, again, assure you that maybe apart from our liaison faculty of IT librarian, none of the liaison librarians that we have any, knowledge connection to understanding of software at all. Like that's outside of the scope of their responsibilities. So I'm wondering and I think for me, I'm wondering, like, I guess out of this call, my question is, how do you get, because I know probably some of the stuff that you guys are doing as librarians, the people that are librarians here, is actually something that here we have something called the research data consulting team that does, which is, how do you gather your survey? Where do you store the data for that? How do you make sure that like matches ethics? How do you then, retain that data? How do you, like, all of those things? We have people that are where I work, like, which is separate core facility, completely different handling that. So, but I do have, again, interested librarians who they're like, this Carpentries thing sounds like a great idea. I don't know anything. I don't know what I could do to like, to, you know, get in on the fun. And I don't know what answer to give them. Like what, I guess, should I be pushing them to the 10 things the ARDC things they've obviously seen. But again, a lot of those are targeted at researchers. Things like Open Refine are obviously like low-hanging fruit training in that. But is there more? Like, how do we get people into the community? How do we start building that community? How do we get people interested in that? And this might be just a question to this group, because a lot of you are librarians. Like, how did you find yourself part of this whole thing? Sorry if that's a bit off topic.
No, I mean, it's a good question. I don't know if Scott has actually been in library carpentry longer than I have, actually. So that might be a question he can answer too. But I can tell you that I think one of the things that's important is just getting exposure to new tools and new ways of working to sort of automate what you're doing, like to improve what you're doing. But there's also that other part of becoming familiar with these workflows. And in some ways they're similar to what the researchers are doing, so some of our lessons, like straddle that line, and the context changes. But it gives them the sort of exposure to understanding how researchers work, so they can, talk to researchers or people in IT, get a better understanding of how the research process is changing, and what they can do in their own services. So I think there's that community aspect, which is really nice too, of like crossing boundaries and learning about what's going on in other places. So we definitely have opportunities there, and I'll talk about the events later. But just by talking to other people from other places is like valuable in itself. To just like we're doing right now, because in the U.S. there is that there are data librarians, there are liaisons that actually delve more deeply into what you're. That was one thing I encountered when I went to Australia, is that there was that that sort of difference that you speak to. But there are like librarians at CSIRO and ARDC and that are like more deeply embedded with researchers as well across Australia. So that was something I found too. So there's kind of like this interesting, at least in Sydney, I heard more about this librarians not being involved so much in that process, but yeah.
But I think, sorry, I'll just address that. It is and it isn't though, because you've met Liz Stokes. Obviously, some of you would have known Belinda Weaver, who are also librarians, but neither of them, you've met them because they've left the library now and they're doing this other stuff with in another organization. Because Belinda was in in a kind of thing which I'm in, which is like a high performance compute support center / analytics. So it's you're away from the library. You're in a completely different org unit than the library, which has a completely different set of KPIs and a completely different set of customer engagements. So, and I think that for a lot of the stuff that we're doing, yes, it's useful to people embedded in that, but we're almost we already kind of know that. And we want to go back to the actual library, the actual people still in the library. Although admittedly, one of the things we were laughing about is that UTS, at least where Liz used to be, they're we just get the librarians, we get the enthusiastic ones that really learn digital skills, and then they leave us and do all this other fun stuff. So there isn't a try that there's you can upskill, but yeah, sorry.
God has a hand, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and this probably isn't representative of everywhere, but in the library we have a good relationship with research data management, and I actually am on kind of that team. And not only that, but a lot of the librarians, as the older people retire, almost every new job in the library now, they're writing in some kind of digital scholarship or kind of data component. So people are coming in kind of needing to learn something to do with data or digital scholarship. And so a lot of, the library carpentry will help them kind of get a skill set on how to kind of deal with more and more researchers who are moving, using data that is more digital. I mean, they've always been using data, and librarians are great at finding data and but now it's in kind of in different formats and in different places. And like just basically at Berkeley, it's just becoming more and more, it's not really digital scholarship anymore, it's just scholarship, and the library is still kind of a hub where a lot of people go to, especially in the social sciences and the humanities. The sciences have kind of got their own kind of part of campus, and they might go through like, Berkeley Research Computing or other places, but I still think like for the humanities and social sciences, the library is still kind of a focal for a lot of our researchers, and they're kind of more and more getting into like a digital scholarship realm and asking for help with best practices for starting a digital project, from how to use a data management plan, how to go about that, and things like that. And so that's where kind of the library and like research data management and people like that, we're helping researchers with that a lot. And that kind of ties into like library carpentry.
I just realized we're coming up on our discussion time, and to jump back to the slide deck. But if you have any follow-up questions, you can put them in the Etherpad, and hopefully I can maybe get back to them there, or one of us can actually as well. So I will switch back to the slides. And I'll try to find them. So yeah, we had our questions. We left off there. So one of the other things I wanted to tell you about was the maintainers. So the maintainers in the Library Carpentry community are very active now. We started working on all of the lessons essentially, and looking at, since we've taught a number of these, like we've taught a number of workshops now with these lessons, it's time to go back and think about updating some of them. Some of the lessons don't need to be updated, so really that much at all. Open Refine and Shell are pretty much the most stable lessons and ready to be published, essentially, or released. So that's one thing to note. But a lot of us hadn't met each other at all. We worked online and just somehow ended up maintaining these lessons. And then this was a great opportunity for all of us that are even new too, to come together and get to know each other, talk about things that they didn't necessarily know about being a maintainer, so technical questions sometimes, but about workflows, and just really about sometimes like the context of why this is valuable to librarians. And so the summary is there. The link is there as well, so you can have a look at our discussions and get a sense. But after that, following that, we've started to have meetings. As I mentioned, we had those initial meetings, and now we're actually having individual maintainer team meetings. And this is just a screenshot of one that I'm involved with around the Git lesson. So that hasn't happened yet, but we've already had meetings around just this week on Intro to Data, and previously on SQL, actually, that was in January. So they've been going on. The maintainers are getting together and coming up with a game plan of how to update the lessons. These are the core lessons. So these are more stable, with the exception of Git, which is beta. It means it needs a little bit more work, but it is ready to teach. But there are a lot of new thoughts about teaching Git that from the instructors that we're going to incorporate. And I mentioned Unix Shell and Open Refine are really some of the most stable lessons we've got. Intro to Data, there's some interesting discussions going on about that, possibly even forming a new lesson out of it for regular expression. So that was an interesting conversation. But they're going out and talking to instructors as well to figure out what worked and what didn't work. And the extended lessons, I think one of the more interesting ones is Tidy Data, which seems to be entering the picture even more as far as a lesson that could be in the core lessons. It seems to resonate with people. And then SQL SQL is the one I'm on, and there really are a lot of people rooting for this one. We feel like this is an invaluable skill to learn, so working on that one to improve it. Web scraping is popular, but it's still in alpha, and so there are a lot of questions swirling around about that. Introduction to Python was one that really needed library examples, more library data, more library context. So that group is working on that. And introduction to data for archivists is that one could actually be the maintainers are no longer really maintaining it, and so it may end up be one that we decommission. But if anyone is interested in it, just let me know. It's still there, and trying to figure out what we can do with that one. This is just to give you a screenshot of like some of the issues that are that we're raising in these in the repositories about improving one of the lessons, SQL. So there's 15 you can see, and you can see one of the issues is audit, look at software carpentry SQL lessons, see if we're missing anything. But we're also looking at going out and talking to instructors and figuring out what worked and what didn't work. And then we have the experimental lessons, which are exciting. One of them that seems to have more development is Wikidata at the moment. And that really kind of developed out of WikiCite, but there were thoughts about doing it before that. And digital preservation is one that I was lucky to attend. They piloted a workshop at IDCC in International Digital Curation Conference in Melbourne recently. And that is an interesting one because it's not exactly hands-on as far as programming or being involved, doing things on a computer. It's more about mapping your workflow. So that's an interesting take. And you can see some of the other ones that are being developed. And this is, again, a screenshot of Wikidata, which is in the Library Carpentry organization repository. And so you can see some of the progress and maybe get involved there. So last but not least is the upcoming events for Library Carpentry. So one of the things is this Mozilla Sprint that I mentioned. It's a little bit different this year. So they haven't said it's on a particular date. It's actually in the month of May. And so we're in the process of submitting something for that, and an announcement will go out soon. But I think in our case, we're trying to find a date range to just to give people time. But it will definitely be in the announcement that maybe groups can choose their own time as well and work on some of the themes that we outline. But that is a great event. It allows you to meet everyone and really just get to know everyone, but get to know the Carpentries and just get familiar with working in the workflows. So the Library Conference, or Liber, or however way you want to pronounce it, is a library conference for Europeans that happens in June of 2019. And one of the things we're trying to do is set up an instructor training for librarians that is aligned with that. In fact, they just did a survey of their community, and Library Carpentry it was up at the top of their list of things that they wanted to do as far as training. So this would be a great opportunity because there's a lot of interest in Library Carpentry in Europe, and this would allow us to have more instructors and answer maybe those capacity challenges that you're hearing sometimes. And then Carpentries in the Libraries calls is something that has been going on every month, and we invite speakers to come in to talk about tools or approaches that maybe we can use in our own workflows, but also consider developing lessons around or incorporating into our lessons. And one of the great things about that is that ORCID has said they wanted to work with us and partner. And so we have an upcoming event that hasn't been announced in May that we'll be working with ORCID and then moving forward as well. But also mentioned there is that had conversations about this series with ARDC and with ZB Med in Europe about offering these sessions in better time zones for people. So, trying to make this available to everyone is a mission. Yeah, and so that is it for the presentation. I saw there were a lot of chats. So yeah, there's one thing from Daria. It's a long, do you want
Sorry, that was just an off topic. That was a completely off topic about tidy data. And it's just, yeah, nothing related to libraries, just me struggling with people having non-tidy data and not understanding how that then screws up statistics in a sense, which was, I had 3 of those last night and I'm like, oh God, tidy data, please give me tidy data, because when you're like, oh, time, I have a different time, different concentrations, and I want the best one. So I'm going to treat all of these as one thing. I'm like, no, if you're going to give us statistical test, that treatment with one thing at a high concentration, then your second most significant one is treatment with a completely different thing at a low concentration. That's not, you can't do that. So yeah, I had that was just, so I was like, and I think that, yeah, there was discussion whether our, the Excel thing. Yeah. Sorry. That was just totally off topic. Sorry.
No, but it's kind of on topic, because that just, again, that points to the fact that you're not the only one that's becoming more important to the library carpentry community, is tidy data as well. So as an entry point. So yeah, it's kind of on topic.
Well, I think that, yeah, if librarians can also be bearers of the concept of tidy data to feed back to researchers when they're trying to upload their small data sets to whatever institutional repositories they have, that actually might be really useful and important for the researchers, for students. Yep, sorry. I think Tracy has a hand.
Yeah, Tracy has a hand.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I just started an issue of like, maybe we should, think about like renaming it, but then also kind of talking about them as more generalizable, and because it is one of the biggest pain points. And I was recently looking through some of the library carpentry workshops, and quite a few of them are teaching the tidy data lesson, I think, instead of the Git lesson. And I don't know how folks feel about that, but it does seem really foundational and really speak to this idea of properly structuring data for use and for sharing and for archival. So I didn't know if any folks on the call had thoughts about the importance of that lesson in the curriculum.
Yeah, let's Scott, I know you have Daria, you haven't been. Scott, do you want to just say something briefly? And then,
well, I mean, it seems like the tidy data stuff, I haven't taught it in a library carpentry, but I've actually taught it in data carpentry, and I feel like it came from there as, and it is a strange thing. Like, it is a lot to do with Excel spreadsheets, and I guess, like with a lot of scientists, like I found out when I taught at the Lawrence Berkeley Labs to a bunch of scientists, that they actually still use a lot of spreadsheets, and they actually use a lot of bad spreadsheet practices, which I was actually kind of shocked about because I didn't realize about this. And so, like, I remember talking to Aaron about this, and I guess, like, it's something that was put into the data carpentry because it seemed really foundational. And a lot of people, when they're teaching the data carpentry, it seemed to really resonate with what they were doing and learning, and really kind of set the stage for like why it was important for this workshop.
Daria, yeah.
So yeah, to say that, yeah, people have data on spreadsheets. Again, as I said last night, I had lots of that. And that's just life. That's not going to go anywhere, because that's what, at least for the sciences, people are so used to their small experience being in that. So teaching them to do it But the frustration we've had with that lesson when I've taught it, because I've actually taught that many times over the years, is that people see that as a lesson of working with Excel as opposed to a tidy data lesson. So I really agree with Tracy that we need to reformulate how we talk about that lesson. Because at the moment I've had, like, the feedback we had when we ran it was every time is, I didn't come here to learn Excel. And that's not that we're not getting quite what we want across. Having said that, I wanted to talk actually about, because it's a library carpentry call, obviously, about tidy data versus Git. And I do think that, yeah, tidy data is probably lower hanging fruit. Like, just also less of a pain point in terms of like novel, crazy stuff you have to wrap your head around. But yeah, I think because I don't expect, like, I don't think a lot of librarians are going to start writing code tomorrow. I think that's that's sort of an advanced workshop for them. Whereas handling data that students provide to them, even in, like, supplementary materials to theses, all of that sort of archiving of data sets and storing all these things, that's something where really the library is already doing that. So they can try to help people make all these things better. So yeah, definitely I think tidy would be an important component. And again, Excel is a familiar tool. So in that case, like, librarians wouldn't, again, have to be, here's GitHub, here's command line. I can see where that could be a bit of like, oh.
Yeah, and I can confirm that Git can be it can be hard, for people to take in these lessons, and that's why we're rethinking it, and because they're at least have tested some things in Git for librarians, and it has gone well, and that needs to be incorporated into the lessons. There's advice from all over the community about, because Git is it was one of the first things that I had to teach, and that was an experience. So yeah, and tidy data has been coming up more and more. So there's been changes, and we have to think about this. And actually, those overall changes are things that the Curriculum Advisory Committee are thinking about, as the maintainers work on these lessons and feed information to them, is thinking about, okay, does this mean maybe we need another structured kind of workshop, with the way the material is being rethought. And so, yeah, those are good questions that are being chewed on right now. They're being thought about in the Curriculum Advisory Committee, and also in the lessons. We've had that discussion about SQL, and where its role in a workshop. And so but I think we're coming up on time, and is it quick?
Yeah, it's very quick. Sorry, I was just wondering, what are the current, like, does Library Carpentry also currently have a core set of things you have to tick? And I was wondering how relevant that is to actual librarians. Might it be better that you have, like, you just have it modularized and that's it? Or is there a core?
There's a core. It's on the lessons page, and that is Shell, Git, Intro to Data, and OpenRefine.
Okay.
OpenRefine is a very popular one. So Intro to Data is pretty popular. Shell is and isn't sometimes, and Git is the hardest one. So yeah, just to give you a perspective. Yeah, those are the core, and we're rethinking that to some degree, because I think one of the things that librarians value is flexibility, and so we have to accommodate that. That's one thing that there have been discussions about as well. But I wanted to leave some time for our for Evo and for Cody and their checkout. So I think I did link to the checkout, the GitHub link, but I also wanted to mention that, so again, by participating in this, you fulfill your checkout, and I will record your name and actually I'll report back from this meeting, and then that will satisfy, you'll see that in your checkout, and then you can move on to your demo. And sometimes people have questions about their demo, and I don't know if you have any questions in the remaining time about your demo.
I just had one quick question that was, if I know that for the demo, we're supposed to use one of the core lessons for any of the carpentries. We created a lesson on a tool that we have developed. It's called Popper, and it's a tool for creating reproducible experimentation pipelines. And we are working on making that contributed lesson of the software carpentry and curriculum, like on the list of contributed lessons. And I was wondering whether it's possible to use that lesson to do the demo, or do we have to use one of the core ones?
I can take that, Chris, if that's okay.
No,
So you have to use one of the ones, the Carpentries ones, because the people doing checkout, the trainers, have to be familiar with the lesson.
I see.
Because they have to go to a spot in the lesson and say, hey, teach this, and be able to evaluate how you taught it.
I see.
So yeah, for checkout, it has to be one of the ones. The other thing to say about contributed lessons is that there haven't really been contributed lessons to software carpentry. We're using Carpentries labs. So let me put the link in here. So yes, awesome. Still want to do community contributed labs, just a slightly different workflow. So I can just send you a note on that, Ivo.
Okay.
Yeah, okay.
Thanks.
Yeah, and the other thing to mention is sometimes people have questions about the process of teaching right away, and you know, I think any contribution. So, like, if you are a helper or you run a workshop, you know, those are really good ways to start. I started with one lesson, teaching one lesson in a workshop with 4 other instructors, and that was fantastic. It really relieved the anxiety of teaching. But being a helper initially is great, because then you get to see instructors, you know, in action, and you know, understanding the logistics of a workshop, and those are really good to understand initially too. So all those are things, you know, because I know it says within a year you have to teach. So that I just wanted to mention that all those other cases are acceptable, and you know, you can report those, and we just, I think the meaning behind that is just that we want to know that you're alive and contributing to the community. So you know, that's that just to let you know a little bit more about that, if you have any questions. Yeah. If you have any others, we have a little bit more time here, but Cody or Evo, you're ready. Yeah, the demo was great, actually. I think it's a great learning opportunity too, to actually get feedback from others, you know, in the session, and from the instructor that's leading it. So it'll be fun, and yeah, maybe you're doing it tomorrow. The way you're moving through everything. So, or maybe next week, but I wish you luck. Yeah, I wish you you know, and hope to see you out there.
Yeah, well, those are more crowded than I think I'm scheduled for like end of March.
Oh, okay. All right. So it's not as fast for that part.
Yeah.
But you do need a little bit of time to walk through the lesson, so that's good. Yeah, I needed the time. Yeah, but so we're almost up on the hour. I want to thank everyone for coming. It's all good. It's great to see you, and you know, again, I hope to see you out there. Maybe think about Mozilla Sprint, or you know, get in touch in any way, contribute in any way, and we're resources. Tracy, Elizabeth, and I, you know, we're resources for you too, if you have questions. So we generally have a team at, right? The team at email that everyone can get to. So that's all of us in the Carpentries that you can get to, but we're all here to help. So yeah, welcome. And and have a good day, everyone. And I will stop recording. Thanks, everyone.
Bye. Thanks, Chris. Good to see everyone.
Yeah,
Bye.
thanks,
Bye
Chris.
bye.
Thank you.